Wishing you a warm and peaceful evening, may it be filled with comfort, light, and a touch of inspiration. Modern civilization measures progress in watts, not wisdom. We build cities that glow from orbit, heat our homes with invisible networks of gas and electricity, and promise comfort on demand with thermostats that whisper to satellites. Yet beneath this abundance hides an uncomfortable truth. The structures that define our age cannot survive a single night without power. Across the northern hemisphere, when a winter storm severs the grid, glass and foam houses lose their warmth with alarming speed. Within hours, the rooms that once hummed with mechanical life fall silent and brittle. Pipes crack. Frost creeps along drywall seams, and families retreat to basements wrapped in synthetic blankets. Comfort, once guaranteed, proves to be a fragile illusion, maintained only by continuous energy. 2 centuries ago, in the same latitudes, dwellings built by hand endured far worse cold with almost no fuel. The contrast seems impossible. A log cabin in 19th century Wisconsin or a timber house in rural Norway could remain habitable for days after the fire died. Their walls were thick but not stuffed with insulation, their windows single-paned, yet free of drafts. They followed a logic older than engineering, a physics of patience and mass. The paradox of progress lies here. The more technology we apply to shelter ourselves from nature, the more dependent we become on that technology's unbroken function. Our ancestors, working with crude tools and deep understanding, created homes that cooperated with the climate instead of resisting it. Modern construction, guided by speed, profit, and standardized codes, fights the environment and loses every time the power falters. The evidence accumulates quietly in data and anecdotes alike. In Alaska, thermal studies show that a typical stick frame house loses nearly 1 degree Fahrenheit of internal temperature per hour when outside air hovers near freezing. At -40, that loss doubles. A home can drop below survival threshold within a day. Meanwhile, ethnographic surveys of preserved Scandinavian cabins, some more than 200 years old, record interiors staying above 50 degrees, with nothing but the residual warmth of a single daily fire. Engineers explain the difference with 2 words: thermal mass. To the uninitiated, insulation and mass sound interchangeable. Both slow the escape of heat, but insulation merely delays loss. Mass stores and releases energy over time. The thick logs of a traditional cabin act like giant batteries charged by firelight. Once heated, they radiate warmth long after the flames fade. In a modern wall, by contrast, fiberglass and foam contain almost no substance. They are barriers, not reservoirs. The moment heating stops, the temperature inside collapses toward equilibrium with the cold outside. Thermal mass behaves according to an elegant rhythm of physics known as thermal lag, the delay between a change in external temperature and its effect inside a dense material. A 12-inch pine log may take an entire day to transmit cold from its outer surface to its inner face. This lag grants the occupants time. As night falls and frost deepens, the cabin continues to breathe out stored warmth. By dawn, the cycle repeats. A new fire renews the charge. The structure swings gently between day and night without the violent oscillations of forced air systems. But the miracle of these old houses is not only in their thickness. It is in their intelligence, an intelligence embedded in joinery, orientation, and proportion. Builders once aligned homes to capture low winter sun through small south-facing windows and to shield northern walls with forests. Roofs projected just far enough to shed snow yet preserve shade in summer. Every decision was empirical, born from generations observing how heat moved, how air leaked, how wood shrank and swelled. By the early 20th century, this accumulated wisdom began to vanish. Industrial sawmills, cheap fossil fuel, and the race to house swelling populations rewarded speed over insight. Instead of carved logs fitted like puzzle pieces, we erected skeletons of milled studs and sheathed them with thin layers of manufactured skin. Comfort was achieved not through material understanding, but through mechanical compensation furnaces, ducts, thermostats, and later electric grids linking millions of houses in an invisible dependency loop. The transition was celebrated as progress, yet each innovation distanced builders from the physical realities they once mastered. The craft of scribe-fit joinery shaping one log to match the irregular contour of another was replaced by dimensional lumber that demanded no intuition. Clay and moss chinking gave way to petroleum sealants. Stone foundations lifted from the frost line disappeared beneath poured concrete slabs that wick cold directly upward. In the process, we traded resilience for convenience. To understand the depth of this trade, it helps to walk through a modern home during winter. Even in silence, its fragility hums. The furnace cycles every few minutes, blasting forced air through thin ducts that leak heat into crawl spaces. Step near a window and the temperature shifts by several degrees. Touch an exterior wall, and you can sense the faint vibration of wind transmitted through siding and studs. Everything is separated by membranes, drywall, vapor barriers, insulation, each designed to resist exchange rather than participate in it. The result is a structure isolated from the world, not in harmony with it. When electricity flows and fuel burns, the illusion of comfort holds. When either fails, the house reveals its true state, a hollow shell whose equilibrium belongs to the surrounding cold. In older architecture, air itself was managed differently. Rather than sealing every crack and then compensating with mechanical ventilation, builders used natural convection. Warm air rising from a central hearth drew in cooler air through controlled gaps near the floor, creating a slow circulation that refreshed the interior without robbing it of heat. The air was never stagnant, yet it was never stripped bare by fans. Smoke filtered through stone channels, exited with surprising cleanliness. The rhythm of breathing extended from people to the building itself. Every aspect of traditional northern construction embodied a principle modern design rarely acknowledges. Heat is not merely a temperature, it is a living flow. In the old worldview, warmth behaved like water, something to be guided, stored, and released with care. The walls, floors, and even the furniture participated in that flow. A thick wooden bench attached to the side of a masonry stove became a thermal reservoir, its surface gently warm for hours. Sleeping alcoves built into the mass of the heater turned the act of rest into communion, with stored sunlight transformed into fire. Contrast this with the sterile uniformity of a thermostat-controlled house. Modern comfort seeks sameness. Every room maintained at precisely the same degree. Yet human bodies do not crave constant heat. They crave gradients, the subtle variation between cool air and radiant surfaces, the sensory dialogue between skin and environment. In the old cabins, one side of the room might glow with invisible infrared warmth, while the other side lingered cool enough to see one's breath. That range of sensation created true comfort, a state where the body could self-regulate rather than depend entirely on machines. The physics of these experiences can be measured, but their wisdom cannot be automated. It arises from the intersection of necessity and observation. Centuries of builders across Siberia, Scandinavia, and northern Canada shared no common language, yet their methods converged. Everywhere the climate punished waste, the same solutions emerged. Heavy walls for storage, small rooms for retention, central stoves for even radiation. These were not coincidences but parallel evolutions guided by the immutable laws of thermodynamics. The story of how those principles were forgotten is, in essence, a story of abundance. Once coal, oil, and later electricity became cheap and ubiquitous, the economic incentive to build efficiently evaporated. A furnace could make up for any deficiency. A power line could erase any mistake. Architecture became an act of assembly rather than understanding. Builders no longer needed to know how wood behaves under frost, how heat migrates through stone, how moisture breathes through clay. The house ceased to be a living organism and became a disposable product. Ironically, this dependence on continuous energy has made modern homes less sustainable, not more. Environmental campaigns often focus on insulation values and appliance efficiency, but these measures address symptoms, not causes. A home that cannot retain warmth naturally is a machine that must be fed forever. When the machine stops, so does habitability. In contrast, the pre-industrial cabin functioned as an energy system in itself, passive, cyclical, and self-stabilizing. The implications reach beyond architecture. They speak to a cultural mindset that equates control with security. Modern construction isolates occupants from nature as though separation were safety. Yet true resilience arises from relationship. The medieval builder knew the forest that supplied his logs, the clay beneath his foundation, the wind that would strike the north wall first each winter. The result was not romantic nostalgia, but pragmatic adaptation. The materials came from within a day's walk, chosen for their known behavior through generations of trial and error. When something failed, the builder understood why, and the correction became part of collective memory. In today's world of global supply chains, few builders ever see the sources of their materials. Walls contain synthetic foams derived from distant refineries, steel fasteners shipped across oceans, chemical coatings designed to last decades but impossible to repair once breached. When failure comes, as it inevitably does, it is total, requiring replacement rather than adjustment. This difference defines the line between craft and consumption, and yet quietly, a reawakening stirs. In recent decades, researchers studying historical log architecture have begun to document the empirical success of those ancient designs. Using thermal sensors, airflow modeling, and material analysis, they confirm what generations once knew instinctively. Density, continuity, and simplicity outperform complexity in harsh climates. A massive wall that stores heat is inherently safer than a thin one that merely delays loss. A chimney routed through interior space warms the upper floors before releasing exhaust. A roof that breathes prevents rot better than one sealed airtight. Each principle, rediscovered through modern science, reads like an echo of ancestral intuition. Standing in front of a surviving cabinet's logs, silvered by centuries of wind, one senses not primitiveness, but mastery. The proportions are compact, the corners tight, the alignment exact. Even the smallest detail, such as the placement of moss in the chinks, reveals knowledge of microclimates and materials chemistry. The builder may have been illiterate, but he understood physics through his hands. Meanwhile, the gleaming suburban home, marketed as high efficiency, conceals vulnerability behind its polished surfaces. Remove electricity for 24 hours, and it reverts to the thermal state of a tent. Its beauty depends entirely on systems invisible to the eye and alien to repair. The contrast feels almost moral a lesson in humility, disguised as thermodynamics. This paradox defines the 21st century's architectural crisis. As we build smarter houses, we seem to make dumber system structures that require sensors, apps, and algorithms to perform tasks once accomplished by form and material alone. The promise of automation seduces us with convenience, but erases resilience. We have designed shelters that know everything except how to survive. Understanding this is not an invitation to retreat into the past. It is a call to recover the physics of wisdom, the recognition that comfort is not the absence of nature, but the mastery of its rhythms. Progress need not oppose the past. It can extend it. To do so, we must learn to read again the language written in grain and stone, in the slow conduction of heat through wood, in the quiet persistence of buildings that still stand after their makers are gone. When examined through this lens, the medieval cabin is not a relic but a blueprint for endurance. Its principles, thermal mass, airtight joinery, radiant heating, and deliberate zoning compose a system that uses no electricity, yet outperforms many modern standards. The challenge before us is not inventing new technologies, but remembering old truths. The next chapters will follow those truths back to their origins. The forests where ancient builders chose their timber, the hearths where masonry absorbed the fire's breath, and the long winters where families survived not through power, but through understanding. In their methods lies not nostalgia, but knowledge. Knowledge capable of transforming how we build in a world, once again learning what cold truly means. Heat, for most of human history, was a visible thing. It came from fire, from muscle, from the sun cutting through cloud and snow. People understood it not as a number on a thermometer, but as a living process. Flame feeding stone, stone warming air, air sustaining breath. When modern science reduced that process to units of energy, BTUs, joules, watts, the intimacy between people and warmth began to fade. Numbers explained everything, yet meaning quietly disappeared. To recover that meaning, we must return to first principles. The physics that ancient builders never named but always applied. The simplest is specific heat, the amount of energy a material can absorb before its temperature rises. Wood, stone, and brick possess relatively high specific heat compared to air. This means they can store large quantities of energy without becoming dangerously hot. When the fire burns in a cabin, the dense log walls and masonry heater absorb heat like a sponge. Hours later, as the air cools, that stored energy seeps back out, invisible yet tangible as radiant warmth. A modern house built of lightweight materials lacks this reserve. Its walls are thin, its surfaces hollow. Once the furnace stops, there is nothing substantial to give warmth back. The air loses heat rapidly because it contains almost no energy compared to the mass of a wall or floor. What insulation does is slow the rate of loss. It cannot create delay. Once the stored energy inside is gone, there is nothing left to radiate. This difference between slowing loss and storing gain defines the thermal character of a building. In a traditional log cabin, every surface participates in a slow rhythm of charge and release. The thick pine timbers absorb the fire's heat during the evening, hold it through the night, and exhale it toward dawn. The process is self-regulating. When the air becomes cool, the temperature gradient reverses and energy flows back into the room. The result is stability, not constancy, but a gentle oscillation between warm and cool. Physicists call the delay between exterior and interior change thermal lag. Measurements on dense log walls show lag times of 12 to 24 hours, depending on thickness and wood species. In practical terms, this means that the interior face of a 12-inch spruce log responds to the cold of midnight around the following noon. The structure acts as a thermal flywheel, smoothing the extremes of climate through time rather than insulation alone. In Finland, where winters can hold steady at -20 for months, researchers reconstructed a medieval cabin and monitored it for an entire season. Despite outside temperatures swinging between 4 degrees and 22 degrees, the interior stayed within a narrow range of comfort. 60 to 68 degree Av near the stove, 50 to 55 degree F in sleeping areas. The fuel consumption averaged less than 1/3 that of a comparable modern dwelling heated by forced air. When they shut the fire completely for 3 days, the cabin never dropped below 45 degrees. Why does mass matter so much? Because heat moves not only through conduction, the contact between materials, but also through radiation and convection. The heavy surfaces of a log home radiate infrared energy directly to the occupants, warming bodies and objects even when air temperature is lower. Modern heating, by contrast, relies on convection, hot air pushed through ducts. Air is a poor conveyor of comfort. It must be constantly reheated and circulated, and when it escapes through leaks, the warmth vanishes entirely. Radiant heat feels different because it is absorbed directly by skin, clothing, and furniture. A surface at 100 degrees can make a room feel perfectly comfortable, even if the air measures only 60. This principle underlies the masonry heater, the massive heart of the northern home. When its internal firebox releases smoke through a labyrinth of brick channels, the heat saturates tons of stone. That mass then radiates slowly, evenly, and silently for up to a day. No fans, no noise, only the steady glow of infrared warmth. Thermodynamics teaches that every system tends toward equilibrium. The genius of traditional construction lies in manipulating that tendency instead of resisting it. By building with materials that change temperature slowly, the builder stretches the timescale of equilibrium. Instead of chasing instant comfort, the cabin creates delayed comfort, a lag that bridges day and night, presence and absence. In a climate where survival depends on continuity, this delay is priceless. The wood itself contributes more than mass. Its structure, composed of millions of microscopic tubes, acts as a network of capillaries for both heat and moisture. When air inside the cabin warms, water vapor gently moves through the log walls and condenses outward, carrying latent heat with it. This vapor permeability prevents rot and stabilizes humidity. In modern airtight houses, moisture has nowhere to go. Condensation forms within insulation layers, inviting mold. Ancient builders did not need sensors to prevent this. They simply used materials that breathe. Another forgotten aspect is the role of air infiltration. Measurements of 18th century Norwegian cabins show leakage rates lower than those of many new homes built to strict codes. The reason is scribe-fit joinery. Each log is shaped individually to match the one below, its curve traced with a compass and carved until the fit is perfect. As the wood dries, its weight compresses the joint tighter, sealing gaps naturally. Between logs lies a mixture of sphagnum moss, clay, and animal hair, each component serving a specific thermal and biological function. Moss provides resilience and microinsulation. Clay ensures airtightness. Hair acts as fiber reinforcement. Together, they form a composite material more effective than many modern foams and entirely renewable. Sphagnum moss, the most humble element, is a marvel of evolutionary design. Its cells retain their structure even when dry, trapping countless pockets of still air. These pockets function as microinsulators, while the moss's natural acidity deters bacteria and insects. In laboratory tests, dried sphagnum packed between boards exhibits R values comparable to contemporary fiberglass bats. But unlike synthetic materials, it adjusts dynamically with humidity and never fully decays. That is why chinking recovered from cabins centuries old still shows elasticity when moistened. Such details illustrate a broader point. The old builders did not oppose physics, they partnered with it. Every material came with dual purposes: structural, thermal, and biological. A log wall was not simply a barrier, it was a storage battery, a filter, a regulator of air and moisture. The system worked as a whole. Remove one component, the mass, the breathing chink, or the radiant core, and the balance collapses. In the industrial age, construction was fragmented into trades: carpentry, masonry, plumbing, electrical. Each specialized layer solved one problem while creating another. The carpenter built for structure, the plumber for pipes, the engineer for heating. No one built for the building itself. The unity between form and physics dissolved. When researchers in Canada and Russia began measuring the performance of heritage log structures in the late 20th century, their data challenged the assumptions embedded in modern building codes. Standard energy models judge efficiency by R value, a measure of resistance to steady-state heat flow. By that metric, a log wall ranks poorly. A 10-inch pine log has an R value of roughly 10, far below the R20 to R40 required in most cold climate regulations. Yet field measurements told a different story. Over weeks of fluctuating temperature, the log houses consistently outperformed higher-rated walls. The discrepancy arises because R value ignores time. It assumes heat moves at a constant rate, as if walls existed in a laboratory of perpetual equilibrium. Real buildings live in cycles day and night, sun and cloud, fire and rest. In those cycles, the slow storage and release of energy matter more than instantaneous resistance. The metric that captures this behavior is effective thermal capacity, the product of mass and specific heat. A heavy material with moderate resistance can outperform a light material with high resistance if its capacity smooths the fluctuations. Tests conducted at the University of Alaska in the 1980s demonstrated this vividly. Two identical cabins, one framed with insulated Tukwag 6 walls and the other built from solid logs, were heated and then allowed to cool. The framed house's interior temperature plummeted within hours. The log house declined gradually over 2 days. In alternating warm-cold cycles, the log structure required up to 46% less fuel. The logs acted as an energy reservoir, absorbing surplus heat when the fire burned and releasing it when it died. The physics extend beyond simple storage. Wood's anisotropy, its directional grain structure, creates complex pathways for heat. Along the grain, thermal conductivity is higher, across it, lower. This means heat spreads unevenly, producing gradients that trap warmth within the wall's depth. Moisture further complicates the picture. As logs dry, the water within their cells evaporates, carrying away latent heat but leaving behind air pockets that insulate. Over decades, the equilibrium between conductivity and porosity stabilizes, giving old cabins their remarkable consistency. In modern engineering, such complexity is often seen as inefficiency. The goal is predictability uniform materials with calculable performance. Yet that very predictability makes modern walls brittle in behavior. When conditions deviate from the design assumption, when humidity spikes, when power fails, the system collapses. The old walls, irregular and organic, adapt. They are self-healing in the thermodynamic sense. Cracks tighten with moisture. Joints compress with load, air paths shift as wood swells and contracts. What appears crude is, in fact, resilient. Another forgotten factor is radiant balance. Modern heating warms air. Old heating warmed mass. Air heating produces stratification, hot near the ceiling, cold near the floor, forcing constant circulation. Radiant systems distribute energy through surfaces, allowing lower air temperatures to feel equally comfortable. Experiments in Scandinavian test houses show that occupants prefer rooms with radiant warmth even when the air is 5 degrees or cooler. The reason lies in human physiology. Our skin senses radiant flux as directly as touch. A stone surface at body temperature equilibrium, around 100 degrees, reduces convective loss from the body, preserving comfort with less energy. Historically, the builders who achieved this balance did not know the equations, but they understood sensation. They placed sleeping alcoves against the warm mass of the masonry heater, cooking areas beside it, storage in the cooler periphery. Each zone followed a microclimate suited to its use. Modern design, obsessed with uniformity, flattens these gradients and multiplies the energy cost. We mistake sameness for comfort and pay for it in fuel. Even sunlight once played a role in the physics of endurance. The orientation of cabins, often with small southern windows and thick northern walls, use solar gain not to heat directly, but to charge the mass of the interior. The low winter sun struck floorboards and logs during the few hours of light, and that warmth seeped slowly through the structure overnight. When combined with the steady rhythm of the masonry heater, the effect created a diurnal thermal wave that paralleled human routine. The house and its inhabitants kept time together. Modern architecture, with vast panes of glass and thin walls, breaks this rhythm. Sunlight floods the space but escapes as quickly as it enters. Without mass to capture it, the light becomes glare instead of heat. Designers compensate with tinted coatings, blinds, and automated shades, technological fixes for a physical misunderstanding. In laboratory settings, these old mechanisms are now being re-evaluated under the lens of sustainability. The emerging field of hygrothermal modeling, the study of coupled heat and moisture transfer, confirms that natural materials regulate interior climates more effectively than sealed synthetic systems. Wood and clay buffer humidity swings, preventing condensation and reducing the need for ventilation energy. Lime plasters and earthen floors, once dismissed as archaic, are proving to outperform plastics in maintaining stable environments. The numbers align with intuition, stability through exchange, not isolation. Yet physics alone does not explain the endurance of traditional houses. There is also the matter of scale. Small rooms, low ceilings, and thick partitions create zones of microclimate. Each cubic meter of air is closer to a radiant surface, reducing stratification and convective loss. Modern, open-plan living with double-height spaces and expansive glazing magnifies the volume that must be heated. Energy disperses into emptiness. The medieval builder, constrained by timber lengths and candlelight, inadvertently optimized for thermodynamics. All these insights lead to a single realization. Efficiency is not about insulation alone. It is about time. The most efficient building is the one that allows time to slow, the time it takes for heat to move, for air to change, for temperature to fluctuate. Slowness is comfort. In a world addicted to instant results, we design fast houses, fast to heat, fast to cool, fast to build, fast to decay. The old builders, working by hand, could only build slowly, and that slowness embedded itself in the physics of their creations. The forgotten physics of warmth, then, is not just an academic curiosity. It is a lesson in humility. When materials are allowed to act according to their nature, they cooperate with the environment instead of fighting it. A log wall does not resist cold. It negotiates with it, storing warmth when abundance allows and releasing it when scarcity demands. A stone hearth does not compete with the air. It anchors the climate of the room. What we call progress layers of synthetic insulation, high-speed air systems, and digital controls may indeed raise efficiency on paper, but in practice, it divorces us from the physical intelligence once inherent in every wall. The result is fragility disguised as sophistication. To rediscover that intelligence is to bridge physics and memory. The formulas remain the same, only our relationship to them has changed. Heat still moves by conduction, convection, and radiation. Matter still stores energy according to mass and specific heat. But somewhere between the hearth and the thermostat, we forgot that these laws describe not just numbers, but experiences. The rhythm of survival that once united fire, wood, and human breath. The next chapter will leave the laboratory and enter the forest, the true beginning of every enduring home. There, among slow-grown pines and spruce hardened by centuries of frost, we will find the raw material of memory and the wisdom encoded in its grain. Across the latitudes that circle the northern world, Norway, Finland, Russia, Canada, Alaska, architecture was once a form of survival literature written in wood. Every settlement, from a ring of Sami huts to a cluster of Russian izbas, embodied centuries of refinement under the pressure of winter. These builders shared no treaties, no schools, no blueprints, yet the logic of their houses converged as if dictated by the same physical law. In Scandinavia, the forest was both quarry and library. Pine and spruce, growing slowly under short summers and long freezes, formed trunks dense enough to ring when struck with an axe. Each tree told a biography in its rings. A wide band meant a mild year. A narrow band meant hunger. Builders sought those narrow rings, for density meant durability. Felling happened only in the deep cold of January when sap retreated and moisture content was lowest. The logs were left to season outdoors, bark intact, through an entire cycle of thaw and frost. The result was timber that could endure centuries without rot. The technique of scribe-fit joinery distinguished these structures from their crude frontier imitations. Instead of stacking round logs with chinks of mud, northern carpenters paired each log individually. Using a compass and chalk, they traced the exact contour of the lower log onto the upper one, then carved until the two met with the precision of a joint in bone. This was work of patience. A single wall could consume weeks. Yet the payoff was airtightness that modern builders struggle to replicate even with synthetic membranes. When the walls settled inevitably, as the wood dried, the weight of the roof pressed the joints tighter. What began with visible seams became a monolith. Moss gathered from bogs was stuffed into the small cavities to cushion movement and block wind. The species mattered. Sphagnum, acidic, and elastic resisted insects and rot. Clay was added only as surface caulk, allowing vapor to pass. Over decades, the building breathed through those layers like a lung, exhaling moisture in summer and inhaling it in winter. In Russia, the evolution of the log house reached monumental scale. The izba, ancestral form of the peasant home, grew from single-room shelters into multi-story dwellings crowned with steep roofs and carved gables. Each izba revolved around the pechka, the massive masonry heater whose core of fired brick defined both the thermal and social heart of the household. Women cooked on its surface, children slept on its ledges, elders warmed their bones against its side. To an outsider, it looked primitive. To a physicist, it was a radiant heat battery of nearly perfect design. The builders understood balance. They lifted floors above frozen ground on stone piers to break the thermal bridge to earth. Windows were small, set deep into thick walls to reduce convection. Ceilings rarely rose higher than 7 feet. Warmth stayed where people lived. The roof space, filled with straw and sawdust, served as insulation and storage. Snow itself became an ally. When drifts piled against the walls, they added another layer of still air. Nothing in these structures fought the environment. Everything bargained with it. In Finland and Karelia, a related tradition produced the smoke sauna, a windowless log chamber heated by a stone stove without chimney. The fire burned for hours, saturating the stones with heat. When the smoke cleared and people entered, the room radiated a gentle, even warmth that lingered for half a day. Though built for bathing, the sauna exemplified the same principle as the home: massive storage, radiant emission, slow cooling. In miniature, it was a lesson in thermal mass perfected by ritual. Across the Atlantic, settlers carried fragments of this knowledge to the New World. Scandinavian immigrants in Minnesota and Wisconsin built cabins using the same scribe-fit methods, while Russian trappers in Alaska replicated the izba. Early American homesteads borrowed the form but not the patience. Milled lumber in haste produced gaps that only endless firewood could compensate for. Yet even among pioneers, stories survived of houses that stayed warm through the worst storms with a single hearth fire. What united these traditions was the principle of local material intelligence. Builders knew the behavior of their resources as intimately as they knew the seasons. The density of pine determined wall thickness. The angle of roof pitch followed snowfall patterns. Even the shape of a doorway responded to prevailing winds. In the Arctic, entrances often led through a low tunnel so that warm air stayed trapped inside. In mountainous Norway, entire farmsteads were linked by covered corridors, allowing passage during blizzards. Every adaptation began as necessity and matured into culture. Modern observers, approaching these relics with instruments and notebooks, often describe them as vernacular architecture, a polite academic term for things built without architects. But the word vernacular undersells their sophistication. These were not naive constructions. They were laboratories of observation operating across centuries. A single mistake, a drafty corner, a misplaced vent, could mean frostbite or famine. Natural selection worked on buildings as it did on species. Those that wasted heat disappeared. In the far north, climate sculpts more than walls. It sculpts character. Life in a timber house demanded rhythm. Fell trees in the deep freeze, build in the thaw, burn with restraint. A household learned to read weather the way a sailor reads tides. A sharp change in wind might mean damp logs and a smoky stove. A dry cold called for sealing gaps with fresh moss. Every gesture connected maintenance to survival. The cabin was not an object one owned, it was a relationship one tended. The skills that produced this intimacy were never written down. They passed by apprenticeship, a father tracing the sweep of a compass for his son, an old mason showing how to feel a wall's draft with bare hands. Each region developed its dialect of technique. In Norway's valleys, where timber was scarce, builders alternated layers of wood and stone, creating hybrid walls with immense inertia. In the taiga of Siberia, where forests seemed endless, cabins grew taller and heavier, their logs so broad that 4 men were needed to roll them. On the tundra, driftwood and whalebone replaced pine, and builders compensated for lesser mass by half-burying homes in insulating earth. Despite the diversity of form, the underlying science remained consistent. Thickness, density, airtight joinery, minimal voids, and a reliable source of radiant heat. The simplicity concealed elegance. A cabin of 100 pieces could balance heat flux as precisely as a modern building armed with sensors. The difference lay in feedback speed. A medieval wall responded over hours. A thermostat reacts in seconds. One smooths the curve, the other chases it. These societies also understood the cultural weight of warmth. In Russia, hospitality began at the stove. Guests were seated closest to the masonry, where the radiant flux was highest, symbol of welcome and protection. In Finland, the communal sauna served not just hygiene, but diplomacy. Disputes were settled in the soft heat where bodies equalized. Warmth was justice as well as comfort, a shared state of matter that dissolved hierarchy. To build badly, to waste heat, was to fail the community. With the 19th century came iron stoves and sawmills. Convenience replaced continuity. Iron promised portability. Lumber yards promised speed. Peasants traded days of carving for the purchase of uniform boards. The scribe-fit wall gave way to the plank and the nail. Within 2 generations, the old techniques receded to the fringes, remote villages, monasteries, isolated farms. Even there, the skills thinned as young builders sought wage work in cities. When industrial architecture finally reached the Arctic, it arrived with an arrogance born of fuel abundance. Engineers imported the same standardized blueprints used in temperate zones: timber frames, asphalt shingles, thin insulation, forced air furnaces. The results were immediate and cruel. Pipes froze, foundations heaved under permafrost, condensation rotted roofs from within. Energy bills soared, but oil was cheap and the lesson went unlearned. A century of progress followed, a cycle of construction and repair that mistook persistence for success. By the mid-20th century, only ethnographers and a few stubborn craftspeople still remembered the old proportions. In northern Sweden, one such craftsman, Anders Lars Nilsson, was filmed in the 1950s, shaping logs with an adze. His motions were slow, precise, almost meditative. Each stroke followed the grain's spiral as if he were reading a sentence in an ancient language. When asked why he refused to use milled lumber, he shrugged, because the tree already knows how to stand. In that simple statement lay the unspoken physics of an entire civilization. Today, the surviving cabins, weathered gray, leaning slightly under the burden of centuries, stand as archives of empirical data. Thermographers have scanned them on winter nights and found even temperature gradients across their walls. No hot spots, no cold bridges. The logs, long seasoned, have reached a thermal equilibrium that barely changes through the year. The roofs, re-shingled by generations, still shed snow cleanly. Many remain inhabited not out of nostalgia, but because they work. Their owners speak of them with a kind of quiet respect, as one might speak of an elder relative. Not perfect, but wise. From a distance, these settlements appear humble small windows, glowing amber against the blue of polar dusk. Step inside and the illusion of poverty vanishes. The air is calm and dry, the warmth even from floor to ceiling. No motors hum, no vents whistle. The silence itself becomes a luxury unknown to the modern home. One realizes that comfort, once achieved through participation in nature's rhythms, has become in the modern world something purchased, powered, and rarely understood. The continuity of the northern building tradition lasted nearly 1,000 years, its variations stretching from the fjords of Norway to the Pacific coast of Alaska. Then, within a single human lifetime, it was nearly extinguished. Its demise was not caused by ignorance, but by economics. Time itself became too expensive. The patient carving of scribe joints could not compete with industrial speed. Energy, once scarce, turned abundant. The market rewarded haste. What the axemen of the forest knew by touch, the weight of a log, the pitch of its ring, the smell of its sap was replaced by drawings, codes, and machines. And yet traces remain. In some rural valleys, old men still teach apprentices to lay moss between logs and to judge dryness by the sound of a strike. Workshops in Norway and Russia now preserve the craft as heritage. Universities model its efficiency on computers. Each rediscovery confirms the same paradox that began this story, that progress often means relearning what was never truly lost. The builders of the Cold North did not set out to design sustainable homes. They built to stay alive. Their genius lay in fidelity to physics and respect for the limits of labor. In their hands, warmth became a partnership between matter and intention. When we walk through their surviving villages today, where smoke drifts slowly above snow-weighted roofs, we are not stepping into the past. We are witnessing a future that already proved itself centuries ago. Every wooden house, if left to silence, speaks softly through scent. Even centuries after the axe, the timber exhales resin and earth. The air inside a true log cabin is never inert. It carries a trace of the forest's metabolism. Pine terpenes, faint acids, a whisper of moss. Long before anyone spoke of indoor air quality, people instinctively knew that such air healed fatigue. The reason lies in the structure of the material itself. Wood is not solid. It is an arrangement of cells designed for motion. Each trunk that grows in the boreal forest is a vertical network of straws, millions of microscopic tubes conducting water and nutrients. In pine, these capillaries tracheids align in long bundles that continue uninterrupted for meters. When the tree is cut and dried, those tubes remain, empty but intact. They become pathways for air and moisture within the walls of a building. The house, in effect, inherits the breathing system of the tree. To the modern engineer trained on steel and concrete, this porosity seems like weakness. But the old builders recognized its virtue. Moisture in the air condenses and evaporates within the wood's depth, not on its surface. The exchange happens slowly, moderating humidity the way a forest moderates weather. In winter, when indoor air grows dry from fire heat, the walls release stored vapor. In summer, when humidity rises, they absorb it again. The process requires no valves or fans. It simply follows the laws of diffusion molecules, wandering from high concentration to low until equilibrium returns. This balance prevents what plagues airtight modern houses: condensation and mold. In a sealed wall stuffed with synthetic insulation, moisture has nowhere to escape. When warm interior air meets a cold outer layer, dew forms inside the insulation, feeding fungi unseen until the damage blooms. The log wall avoids this by letting the vapor migrate gradually through its mass, cooling in increments rather than at a single boundary. The temperature gradient across 12 inches of wood may span 40 degrees, yet no layer ever crosses the dew point. Physics and biology coexist in truce. Scientists today measure this property under the term hygroscopic buffering, the ability of natural materials to absorb and release moisture to maintain a stable environment. Clay, lime, and timber all possess it. Plastics do not. In experiments at the Technical University of Denmark, log houses showed interior humidity between 40 and 60% year-round without mechanical humidifiers, even as outside air fluctuated from sub-zero dryness to summer damp. The occupants described the air as soft, a word absent from scientific vocabulary, but exact in sensation. The same microstructure that moderates water also moderates heat. Within each tracheid, thin cell walls act as thermal resistors, while the hollow interiors trap air nature's most efficient insulator. When these millions of cavities are aligned, heat must weave a tortuous path through alternating solid and void, losing momentum with every boundary. That is why dense old-growth timber insulates far better than its low-density modern equivalent. Fast-grown pine from plantations contains wide early wood bands, thin-walled, full of air that compress under weight and lose integrity. Slow-grown timber from cold forests develops narrow rings of late wood, so compact they resemble stone. The difference in thermal diffusivity can be more than 30%. Old builders selected their logs by instinctive testing. They tapped each with an axe. The dull sound meant softness. The clear ring meant density. They placed ends in snow overnight. Those that absorbed little moisture were chosen for outer walls. Science would later describe these tests in terms of fiber saturation points and capillary action, but the outcome was the same. Select material that moves slowly between states. Slow in drying, slow in wetting, slow in heating. Slow to fail. The breath of wood extends beyond humidity and heat. It includes gases invisible yet vital. Freshly cut pine emits volatile organic compounds, terpenes, that act as mild antiseptics. In small concentrations, they inhibit bacterial growth and create the distinctive fragrance of a cabin. Modern research on forest bathing attributes part of its therapeutic effect to these same molecules. A wooden house thus recreates a fragment of the forest's chemical ecology indoors, reinforcing the sense of vitality its builders never needed to explain. The old craftsmen also understood the sound of wood's breath. A dry log creaks at night as temperature shifts, expanding and contracting with the day's rhythm. The noise is not a defect, but a reminder that the material is alive within its limits. In contrast, the synthetic stillness of plastic or metal walls isolates their occupants from time. In a log cabin, time is audible. The building flexes, settles, sighs. Its life is slow, but it never stops. Durability begins where balance is maintained. Wood that can breathe does not rot. Wood that is sealed suffocates. Decay, in biological terms, requires 3 conditions: moisture, oxygen, and warmth. The log wall denies them coincidence. When humidity rises, temperature drops within the material, and oxygen diffuses slowly. When the surface warms, it dries. The cycle breaks the chain of rot. That is why ancient cabins endure in the same climate that crumbles concrete in decades. Their slow respiration keeps them perpetually just beyond the comfort zone of fungi and bacteria. This self-regulation extended even to pests. Sphagnum moss packed between logs exudes mild acidity, its pH around 4 creating an environment hostile to insects. Clay layers block light, discouraging burrowing larvae. The result is a habitat uninviting to anything except people. Centuries later, when restorers dismantle old walls, they often find moss still springy and fragrant, preserved by the very chemistry that once supported life in the bog. In contrast, modern houses wrap timber skeletons in layers of impermeable membranes, polyethylene vapor barriers, acrylic sealants, synthetic foams. These materials trap moisture instead of guiding it. The first leak becomes a wound that cannot heal. Trapped water seeps into insulation, and decay proceeds unseen until the structure collapses. Engineers respond with more technology: sensors, dehumidifiers, fans, while the ancient cabin continues breathing quietly without assistance. The breath of wood also mediates temperature on a psychological level. Air within a log house moves differently. Slow eddies of convection glide along warm surfaces, carrying faint scent of resin. The warmth feels thick, not because it is hotter, but because it radiates from mass rather than ducts. People describe it as enveloping, like sunlight filtered through fog. The brain registers radiant heat through deep skin receptors, associating it with proximity and safety. In evolutionary terms, it is the memory of fire translated into architecture. Anthropologists studying rural northern communities often note the emotional vocabulary attached to their houses. In Finnish and Russian dialects, the same words describe both warmth and kindness. Tepli shaloveka, warm person shares root with teplo dom, a warm home. The metaphor is literal. Warmth equates to life. To build a breathing wooden house was to craft an extension of one's own body, porous, resilient, sensitive to change. Longevity arises from that empathy. When builders understood the material as alive, they treated it with respect. Logs were oriented so that the heartwood faced inward, bark side out, mimicking the tree's natural defense against weather. Roofs extended generously to shield walls from driving rain. Maintenance was ritualized. Every autumn, cracks were checked, moss renewed, tar brushed onto exposed ends. These acts preserved not only the building, but the bond between builder and matter. Scientists analyzing timbers from 400-year-old Scandinavian barns find no chemical preservatives. No paints-only wood tar distilled from pine roots. Its molecules, close cousins of the terpenes, already present in the sap, penetrate the surface and polymerize into a thin, breathable armor. The combination of density, acidity, and microporosity gives the timber an effective lifespan measured in centuries. Modern treatments attempt the same with synthetics, yet often shorten life by blocking exchange. Perhaps the most profound aspect of wood's breath is its contribution to thermal emotion, the way the human body perceives comfort beyond mere degrees. A log wall at 60 degrees radiates enough infrared warmth to make air at 55 feel tolerable. The subtle scent of resin signals safety to our nervous system, lowering stress hormones. Even the color of wood, its amber hue, rich in long wavelengths, reflects light that the eye interprets as warmth. These effects, minor in isolation, accumulate into a physiological harmony modern interiors rarely achieve. When psychologists measure occupants' well-being in wooden versus synthetic environments, the results mirror ancient intuition. Heart rates drop, blood pressure decreases, concentration improves. The same cellular patterns that store heat also soothe the mind. What we call coziness is the sum of many invisible reciprocities between moisture and air, radiation and skin, scent and memory. In this sense, the breath of wood is not metaphor but mechanism, a bridge linking physics to emotion. The builders of the North may not have known molecular diffusion, but they knew that a house that breathes with its inhabitants never feels cold. Their mastery lay in letting materials perform their natural roles, moss to insulate, clay to seal, wood to live. Together, these elements formed a dynamic equilibrium that required neither maintenance contracts nor electricity, only attention and care. Today, as architects experiment with mass timber towers and engineered cross-laminated panels, they rediscover fragments of that wisdom. Laboratory data confirm what the axemen already sensed, that the cellular breath of wood stabilizes both structure and spirit. The challenge is not to romanticize the past, but to translate its physics into modern form-to-design buildings that breathe with us again. The forests that once fed those cabins still stand, waiting. Their slow-growing trunks hold within their rings the memory of endurance. Every year they add a thin layer of fiber, storing sunlight as potential warmth for someone who may never know their name. To fell such a tree with respect is to participate in a cycle of exchange older than industry. When its wood becomes a wall that sighs in the night wind, the breath of the forest continues inside, reminding its inhabitants that comfort and coexistence are the same thing. Fire is the oldest engineer humanity ever employed. Long before the wheel or the plow, the hearth organized life. In the frozen latitudes of the north, it became both sun and heart, the single instrument that turned shelter into home. The difference between a poor house and a good one was measured not by decoration, but by how far its warmth reached after the fire went out. The earliest hearths were open pits dug into the floor, inefficient and smoky. They consumed forests to heat a single room. Over centuries, the fire migrated upward into stone, evolving into the masonry heater, a machine of gravity and patience. Instead of radiating flame directly into the air, it captured heat in mass. The transformation was simple yet revolutionary. Burn hot and fast once, then live from the stored energy for a day. In Russia, the form matured into the pechka, a monolith of brick that occupied nearly a quarter of a peasant house. In Finland and Sweden, it appeared as the kakelun, tiled in glazed ceramics that shimmered like frost. In Germany, the kachelofen filled the same role. Each culture tuned the geometry to its own fuel and climate, but the physics was universal. A masonry heater works by forcing smoke and hot gases through a labyrinth of internal flues before they reach the chimney. Each turn extracts energy from the exhaust, transferring it to the dense brick walls. By the time the smoke escapes, it is cool enough to rest your hand above the chimney mouth. The stored heat then radiates slowly, evenly, silently. For 12 to 24 hours, the room remains warm, the surface of the stove gentle to touch, yet rich in infrared glow. Modern thermodynamics explains the marvel in clear equations. High-temperature combustion yields complete fuel efficiency. Massive thermal capacity yields time-delayed radiation. But the builders of the old world needed no equations. They learned through survival that an hour of intense labor at dawn, tending a quick fire, was cheaper than feeding a weak flame all day. Efficiency was measured in wood piles and comfort, not kilowatts. Inside these homes, the stove became architecture itself. Its masonry core was often placed at the center, forming one wall of the main room and another of the sleeping alcove. Some designs integrated baking ovens or benches into the flue path so that every surface contributed. A family might sit on warm stone to spin wool, cook soup on its iron top, and then sleep against it under heavy blankets. The warmth was tactile and communal. Visitors to 19th century Russia described astonishment at the steadiness of heat. Mark Twain, traveling through the country, wrote of rooms that remained pleasantly warm until past midnight from a fire burned only at breakfast. Peasants would lock the stove door after the morning blaze, confident it would hold. The brick's outer face rarely exceeded 150 degrees warm enough to radiate, never enough to scorch. The entire dwelling became a low-temperature sun. In contrast, the open fireplace of Western Europe and colonial America wasted most of its energy. Flames roared upward, drawing heated indoor air with them. The more wood one burned, the colder the room became once the fire died. Chimney drafts scoured away heat faster than walls could absorb it. The masonry heater solved this paradox by separating combustion from emission. Fire was an engine, not a spectacle. Its efficiency reached astonishing levels for pre-industrial technology. A properly tuned kekelun consumed a small basket of pine, barely 30 pounds of wood to heat a house for a day. Tests by Swedish engineers in the early 20th century measured overall efficiencies above 80%, rivaling modern furnaces. Yet it required no metal, no electricity, only brick and discipline. The secret lay in the rhythm of use. Burn once, close the flue, wait. The rest was physics. Culturally, this rhythm shaped daily life. Morning began with the striking of a single match, a ritual equal parts necessity and meditation. Children learned early to judge flame by color: blue for clean burn, yellow for waste. The family gathered as the stove roared, feeding it thin sticks until the bricks began to hum with stored heat. Then the firebox was shut and silence returned. Through the day, meals cooked on residual warmth. By night, the stones beneath blankets still breathed heat. The house did not chase temperature, it glided through it. Because radiation warms objects rather than air, the experience of comfort was subtly different. You could sit by the stove and feel heat soaking into your bones, even though the thermometer read lower than in a modern heated room. There was no draft, no dryness, only a quiet equilibrium. In the corners, frost flowers etched the windows, but they were decoration, not threat. The boundary between winter and hearth was measurable in inches yet absolute. In multi-room cabins, builders placed the stove so that one face served the kitchen, another the sleeping quarters. Flues snaked upward through upper floors before exiting the roof, warming attics and preventing ice dams. Some designs even routed a final channel beneath a bread-drying loft, turning exhaust into preservation. Every calorie was used twice. The logic was circular, never wasteful. To the eye of a modern observer, such systems appear oversized, but the size is the source of their grace. Mass delays change. Delay means resilience. In the masonry heater, time itself becomes insulation. When storms cut fuel supply or illness prevented tending, the stored warmth carried families through. It was not merely a stove, it was a thermal bank account, paying dividends of survival. Every civilization that endures the cold eventually reaches the same conclusion. Comfort is not produced by flame, but by the memory of flame. The masonry heater embodies that realization in brick and mortar. It transforms a volatile force into persistence, turning combustion into continuity. To understand its impact, one must see not only the physics, but the social geometry it created. The stove dictated the plan of the northern home, rooms clustered around its core like planets around a star. The warmest zones, sleeping alcoves, cradles, benches, sat nearest the masonry. Cooler corners stored food and tools. Even livestock shelters were sometimes attached to share residual warmth. The heater's steady radiation established a hierarchy of space: center for life, periphery for preservation. Architecture became thermal cartography. The rhythm of heating also shaped time. Because the stove burned once a day, life synchronized to its pulse. Morning heat meant labor. Midday stability meant work outdoors. Evening decline signaled rest. The human circadian cycle found a physical twin in the daily cooling curve of brick. Modern central heating, with its constant hum, erases this rhythm. It offers uniformity but steals the narrative of warmth, the sense of effort and reward, of fire earned. Technically, the stove's superiority lies in its use of radiant transfer rather than convection. Air furnaces heat molecules that quickly rise, stratifying the room. Radiant surfaces emit infrared energy directly to the objects they see. Because the walls and floors absorb and re-radiate this energy, the result is even temperature and low air movement. In measured tests, rooms heated radiantly can maintain comfort at air temperatures 5 to 7 degrees lower than forced air systems. The savings are real, but the sensory difference is greater still. People feel embraced rather than ventilated. Another overlooked virtue is silence. A masonry heater has no moving parts. Its only sound is the faint crackle of wood, and later, the ticking of cooling stone. The absence of mechanical noise transforms perception. You hear the creak of settling logs, the wind outside, your own breathing. The house becomes an instrument of calm. In a modern home, comfort is mediated by machines, fans, compressors, thermostats, constant reminders of dependence. In the old one, warmth seems to arise from the material world itself, unmediated and complete. The materials of the heater mirror those of the earth it inhabits. Clay bricks, river stones, sand mortar. Each absorbs and releases heat according to its mineral character. Builders knew their media by touch. Granite for longevity, soapstone for smoother radiation, brick for balance between weight and workability. The Finnish stoves of the 18th century, often faced in glazed tiles, demonstrated an early fusion of engineering and art. The glossy surfaces were not vanity but function. Glaze slowed surface cooling, extending the release period by hours. Beauty served endurance. Over generations, the stove became the spiritual anchor of domestic life. In Russian folklore, it was the dwelling place of the house spirit, domovoi. Children were told never to speak ill near it. Couples pledged vows before it. When a family moved, they carried coals from the old hearth to the new one, transferring continuity as sacred fire. The psychological comfort of such rituals was inseparable from physical heat. Fire was not simply energy, it was identity. The symbolism reached deep into language. The Russian word for home, ochag, literally means hearth. In Finnish, kotilämpö home, warmth conflates place and temperature. Even in English, keep the home fires burning stands for loyalty. When the industrial age replaced hearths with radiators, it also rewrote our metaphors. Warmth became a commodity measured in BTUs, purchased, not cultivated. The loss was more than aesthetic, it was existential. From an engineering perspective, the masonry heater achieved a level of performance that modern systems still struggle to match without external power. Because it stores heat in mass, it can operate with almost no temperature swing, even after a day without fire. Experiments in contemporary Austria, where a revival of Kachelofen craftsmanship continues, show interior wall temperatures remaining within 2 degrees Celsius of average for 20 hours after combustion ends. The surface heat flux declines gradually, avoiding the sharp peaks and troughs that fatigue modern materials. The heater behaves like a living organism, taking in, holding, releasing. This continuity made the old houses remarkably resilient. During storms or power outages, nothing essential changed. No pumps failed, no fuel delivery stopped. The house contained its own infrastructure. Compare that to the modern dependence on a grid. The flick of a switch now decides survival. The northern builders, with limited resources, achieved energy security through mass and design. Their solutions were passive long before the term existed. The masonry heater also influenced diet and culture. Its constant gentle warmth enabled slow cooking, fermentation, and drying. Soup simmered overnight. Bread rose by residual heat. Mushrooms and berries dried in upper chambers. The same energy that preserved life physically preserved food chemically. Every calorie of wood served multiple purposes before drifting as faint warmth into the walls. In the present century, environmental architects have rediscovered these principles under new names: thermal mass design, passive solar heating, low exergy systems. Their equations confirm what villagers once learned empirically, that storing heat in mass and releasing it slowly reduces total energy demand by orders of magnitude. The masonry heater is not nostalgia. It is an early form of sustainable technology. Its materials are local, its operation cyclical, its lifespan measured in generations. Perhaps its greatest lesson, however, lies in perception. The heater teaches patience. You cannot rush a 2-ton block of brick to warmth. You must plan, observe, and wait. The delay between action and result encourages awareness of cause and consequence, a rare experience in a world of instant control. The family that lives by such rhythm learns the physics of mindfulness long before it is taught as philosophy. As the 21st century grapples with energy transition, the fire that lasts all day offers a model of sufficiency rather than abundance. It reminds us that the goal of technology should not be to accelerate consumption, but to slow it gracefully. The Pichka, the Kokolun, the Kachalofan all whisper the same truth in different tongues. Stability is a function of slowness, not size. To live warm in winter is not to conquer nature, but to synchronize with it. When a modern visitor steps into one of these old houses on a polar night, the feeling is unmistakable. The air is still, the light from the stove's small door golden against the logs. Outside, frost cracks like gunfire, yet inside there is only the pulse of stored sun turning quietly into comfort. You sit, stretch your hands toward the tiles, and realize that this warmth is older than the house, older than the craft, older even than language. It is the echo of humanity's first alliance with matter, a pact between fire and stone that still holds. The 19th century did not destroy the wisdom of building with wood and stone in a single stroke. It dissolved it slowly, grain by grain, until memory itself became surplus material. What vanished was not only a set of techniques, but a worldview in which shelter was a living system. The catalyst was speed. Industrialization promised to compress time. Faster saws, faster brick kilns, faster profit. The same revolution that multiplied steel rails and telegraph lines also recast the house as a product. A cabin built by a family for its descendants took months. A frame house for sale could be raised in weeks. Cost and velocity became the new physics. Patience, once a structural property, turned into inefficiency. In the lumberyards of the 1850s, steam-powered saws sliced logs into uniform planks, severing the intimate correspondence between tree and wall. The carpenter no longer read the grain, he nailed what the machine delivered. Nails themselves replaced joinery, erasing the logic of compression and settlement that had made log structures airtight. Each nail was an act of convenience and a small betrayal of material intelligence. Cheap energy accelerated the forgetting. Coal and later oil made it possible to heat even badly built houses without much thought. When warmth could be purchased by the ton or the barrel, efficiency lost meaning. The delicate equilibrium between thermal mass and radiant transfer collapsed into brute force combustion. By the early 20th century, the domestic hearth had migrated into basements as furnaces, unseen and unconsidered. The emotional center of the home cooled with its absence. Urbanization widened the rift. In cities, housing became an engineering problem to be solved by repetition. Brick gave way to cinder block, plaster to drywall, wood to steel studs. The inhabitants of such structures lived within systems they could not repair or understand. Heating, ventilation, and electricity arrived through networks as invisible as authority itself. When the system failed, the remedy was not knowledge, but service. Dependence replaced competence. Education mirrored the shift. Craft schools that once taught scribe-fit joinery and masonry heater design closed or reinvented themselves as technical institutes, emphasizing abstract calculation over tactile skill. The master-apprentice lineage that had preserved centuries of localized wisdom disappeared within a generation. Builders became contractors. Craftsmen became laborers. The language of building flattened from poetry to specification. The war years completed the transformation. After 1945, millions of returning soldiers needed homes, and governments answered with mass production. The suburban house was designed to be built fast, sold once, and replaced within decades. Plywood, fiberglass, and asphalt shingles replaced timber, moss, and tile. The promise of modernity glittered in catalogs, showing wide lawns and thermostats, the new symbol of control. Yet beneath the promise lay fragility. The walls were light, the climate control continuous. The cost of failure was simply paid in fuel. In colder regions, the consequences appeared quickly. When the first energy crises struck in the 1970s, homeowners discovered how little their insulated boxes could endure. Without electricity to drive furnaces, interior temperatures plunged within hours. Pipes burst, walls mildewed. Engineers responded with better insulation, thicker seals, more complex mechanical ventilation, the same logic of separation that caused the weakness. Few asked the deeper question: why had the old houses survived without any of this? In academic circles, the answer was dismissed as nostalgia. The medieval builder, they said, worked under necessity, not understanding. Yet necessity is the purest teacher of physics. The log house and masonry heater were not accidents. They were experiments conducted over centuries with the cold as examiner. Their data were survival rates, not blueprints. When those experiments were abandoned, humanity did not transcend nature. It merely lost its feedback loop. Industrialization also altered materials themselves. Trees grown on plantations matured in decades rather than centuries. Fast growth produced wide, soft rings. The resulting lumber was light, weak, and thermally unstable. A wall of such wood could not perform like the dense pine of the boreal forest, but the market valued quantity over quality. So sawmills continued to harvest youth instead of age. The thermal intelligence of the forest, its slow accumulation of density, was replaced by monoculture measured in yield per acre. The disappearance of knowledge was therefore not merely cultural, but ecological. When forests ceased to grow old, builders lost the very substance that had taught them endurance. Materials designed for permanence were replaced by those designed for replacement. The rhythm of maintenance annual tar coating, moss renewal, stove cleaning gave way to the logic of warranty and disposal. A new kind of time entered architecture, short, linear, amnesic. Yet even as tradition faded, fragments endured in remote regions. In Alaska, trappers still built cabins with hand-scribed logs. In rural Russia, masons quietly repaired pechkas using inherited proportions. In Finnish forests, elders tended saunas heated by stone. Their work went largely unnoticed, recorded only by ethnographers and a few photographers who recognized that each gesture placing moss, testing draft, was a syllable of a vanishing language. By the end of the 20th century, that language survived only in museums and memories, waiting for rediscovery by a generation suddenly aware of its absence. The first rediscovery came not from architects, but from scientists puzzled by the failures of progress. In the 1970s, researchers at cold climate institutes in Canada, Finland, and the Soviet Union began to measure why modern houses froze so quickly when power failed. They expected numbers to confirm superiority of new materials. Instead, the data quietly embarrassed them. A small log cabin from the 1800s, used as a control sample in Fairbanks, outperformed insulated prototypes built a century later. It cooled 5 times slower, maintained higher humidity balance, and showed lower condensation risk. Engineers called it anomalous. But the anomaly repeated itself wherever traditional methods still existed. The science of comfort had lost contact with the science of heat. In the following decades, interest in passive design grew out of environmental concern. Energy scarcity forced a generation of architects to revisit forgotten logic: thickness, orientation, mass, and air movement. They gave ancient principles new names: thermal inertia, hygrothermal coupling, low exergy systems, and published them as innovation. But the old builders of the North would have recognized every diagram. The circle had turned. Knowledge returned disguised as discovery. Restoration projects provided tangible proof. In the 1990s, Swedish preservationists rebuilt 17th-century log churches using only traditional tools. Their aim was authenticity. Their surprise was performance. Without insulation or mechanical heating, the churches stabilized near 60 degrees through winter from a single daily fire. Air quality tests showed carbon dioxide levels and humidity more stable than in sealed modern buildings. The results triggered a quiet reconsideration of primitive architecture. Museums once meant to display relics became laboratories of sustainability, yet full restoration of lost skill proved difficult. The crafts that supported the old systems, moss harvesting, clay preparation, stone kiln firing, had vanished with the communities that practiced them. Manuals could record steps, but not touch, not judgment. The master mason's intuition of how a chimney draws or the carpenter's ear for a log's ring resisted codification. When younger builders tried to replicate these acts by rule, something vital went missing: the rhythm of feedback between hand, material, and weather. This loss revealed a larger truth about knowledge itself. The old builders never separated physics from culture. They learned through participation. Their understanding was embedded in action. Industrial modernity split those domains apart. Science abstracted, craft manualized, art aestheticized. The house ceased to be a site of learning and became an object of consumption. Recovering the wisdom of resilience thus required more than reviving techniques. It required reuniting ways of knowing. A few pioneers attempted exactly that. In Norway, architect Hans Olav Højdahl spent years measuring surviving log houses and correlating geometry with thermal behavior. His conclusion was simple but radical. The secret of warmth lay not in any single feature, but in the harmony of all log density, chinking material, room proportion, heater placement. To copy one element without the others was to break the system. The whole was the design. Parallel movements arose elsewhere. In Vermont, builders rediscovered masonry heaters as alternatives to oil furnaces, founding guilds to teach the craft anew. In Japan, carpenters combined ancient timber joinery with modern seismic analysis, proving that flexible wooden frames could survive earthquakes better than concrete. In Russia, rural cooperatives restored pechkas for off-grid villages, not as nostalgia, but as strategy. Across continents, fragments of memory began to form a new coherence. Still, mainstream construction remained trapped in its logic of disposability. Global supply chains replaced local materials. Energy codes emphasized numerical insulation values over real-world performance. The builder became an installer of systems rather than a shaper of climate. Every layer of progress added another layer of dependence. Houses grew smarter, but their inhabitants grew less so. Then came the 21st century's disruptions, blackouts, fuel shortages, rising energy prices, and the new anxiety of climate instability. Suddenly, the question that once seemed romantic, how did the old houses stay warm, returned as urgent. Research teams in Scandinavia and North America began instrumenting surviving cabins with sensors, translating their slow wisdom into data once again. The results confirmed what had been intuition all along. Resilience begins with mass, breathability, and modesty. Philosophically, the rediscovery coincided with a shift in how knowledge is valued. The green architecture movement, at its best, recognized that sustainability is not invention, but memory. To live sustainably means to remember how matter behaves when left alone. The humility of pre-industrial builders, accepting wood's shrinkage, air's movement, fire's cycle, became a model for modern design ethics. What had been dismissed as superstition now read as systems thinking. Even language began to change. Terms like passive, slow, and low energy gained prestige. The concept of a smart building expanded from sensors and software to include biological intelligence, the ability of materials to regulate themselves. Clay, lime, and timber returned to architectural vocabulary, not as relics but as teachers. In a world seeking climate adaptation, the cabin of the past became a prototype for the future. Yet something deeper than utility drives the revival. People who rebuild these houses often describe a sense of reconnection, not only with history but with time itself. A wall that takes months to carve, a stove that needs an hour to heat, a tree that grew a century before felling. Each slows human rhythm to match the planet's. Slowness becomes not inefficiency, but belonging. Knowledge returns through patience. In the closing decades of the industrial age, when every process from communication to construction accelerates, the rediscovery of ancient building science serves as quiet rebellion. It reminds us that speed is not the same as progress, and that warmth measured in hours of endurance may mean more than degrees on a thermostat. The disappearance of knowledge was never total. It was only disguised by noise. Beneath the hum of modern systems, the old logic of matter still waits, unchanged, asking to be heard again. To measure warmth is to measure more than temperature. Thermometers tell only the story of air. They do not record the quiet dialogue between bodies, walls, and time. A cabin at 60 degrees can feel warmer than a concrete apartment at 75, because warmth, in the human sense, begins where physics meets perception. The old builders never separated those realms. They understood that comfort is a composite of radiation, humidity, sound, light, and scent, the whole ecology of presence. Their structures, born of scarcity, treated every calorie as sacred. Heat was not a background condition. It was the rhythm of existence. To live warm was to live attentively. In modern society, temperature has become abstracted from experience. A digital thermostat quantifies comfort to a decimal, but the number rarely matches how a room feels. We have replaced the sensory feedback of material with the illusion of control. When a modern home cools, the response is immediate. Press a button, summon energy. The gesture bypasses awareness of cause and cost. The medieval inhabitant, in contrast, knew exactly what warmth demanded: the felling of trees, the splitting of logs, the tending of fire. Heat carried memory of labor. Each degree had a history. This intimacy with energy produced what philosophers now call embodied knowledge. The body understood the house as extension of itself. When the stove cooled, the pulse slowed. When the fire roared, blood vessels opened. Even in language, the self and the shelter merged. To be cold-hearted was moral failure. To be warm-blooded, virtue. Warmth measured empathy as much as physics. Scientists studying comfort today confirm what intuition knew. The human body perceives heat not linearly but relationally. The same air temperature feels different depending on surface radiation, humidity, and movement. We sense changes rather than absolutes. A sudden draft registers as discomfort, even if the average temperature is high. This dynamic sensitivity explains why radiant heating from masonry stoves produces deeper satisfaction. The skin interprets steady, diffuse radiation as safety. The same signal fire once gave in the dark. Cultural history mirrors this biology. For centuries, warmth defined civilization itself. Hearths anchored mythology, religion, and law. In Roman houses, the central fire gave rise to the word family. In Northern Europe, communal halls were designed around long fires where stories and judgments unfolded. To sit near the hearth was privilege. To be banished from it was punishment. Warmth thus became a social geometry, ordering proximity and belonging. The Industrial Revolution inverted that geometry. Heat moved from center to periphery, from visible flame to hidden pipes. Radiators lined walls, furnaces retreated to basements. The household heart turned mechanical. Fire lost its face. People no longer gathered around a source. They dispersed into rooms equally heated but equally isolated. Comfort became privatized. Psychologists studying post-war domestic life noted a subtle loneliness in these efficient homes. Uniform temperature eliminated reason for gathering. The nightly ritual of tending fire, once shared labor, was replaced by solitary gestures, adjusting a dial, closing a vent. What vanished was not warmth, but participation. In its absence, warmth lost depth. To measure that loss requires a different kind of instrument, one sensitive to meaning rather than degrees. Anthropologists call it thermal culture, the set of practices through which societies produce and value heat. In Japan, for example, the kotatsu, a low table with a small heater beneath and a shared blanket above, maintains the intimacy the West lost with the hearth. Family life there still centers on proximity to heat, not its uniform distribution. The device embodies an old truth. Comfort grows through concentration, not expansion. The same principle guided northern builders. Their houses accepted gradients, warm near the stove, cooler by the walls, cold in storage. Each zone corresponded to purpose. Sleep required less heat than waking. Food preservation demanded chill. Modern design, by contrast, seeks homogeneity, flattening all experience to the same neutral climate. In doing so, it multiplies energy use and diminishes meaning. The gradient was not imperfection, it was life. There is a profound irony in how we define progress. We celebrate constant temperature as triumph over nature, yet the constancy itself dulls sensation. The body evolved to interpret variation as information. When the environment stops changing, awareness fades. In the old houses, warmth moved in waves, morning surge, evening decline teaching, patience and gratitude. Each return of heat reaffirmed survival. Today, with thermostats set to auto, survival feels outsourced. We inhabit climate without feeling it. If warmth once marked the boundary between wilderness and dwelling, it now reveals the boundary between connection and abstraction. To understand this, one must look beyond architecture to the moral temperature of civilization itself. Warmth has always been a metaphor for care. To warm another person is to recognize their fragility. The hearth once taught this lesson daily. Its fire demanded tending. Neglect led to cold. Responsibility and comfort were inseparable. In caring for the flame, people practiced empathy in matter. Modern convenience has hidden that relationship. When heat flows invisibly through ducts and wires, compassion fades into background noise. Machines serve us, but they cannot teach us tenderness. This loss becomes visible during crisis. When power fails in winter and a house cools to silence, we rediscover the ancient equation between labor and survival. Suddenly, warmth regains moral weight. Neighbors share firewood. Families gather in one room. The mechanical system's failure reawakens the social system it replaced. For a moment, heat becomes communal again. The event reveals what daily comfort conceals. That warmth is not a commodity, but a covenant among beings. Physically, warmth is order. The second law of thermodynamics tells us that heat flows toward equilibrium. Cold is simply the absence of motion. Culturally, the law repeats itself. Societies cool when energy ceases to circulate between people. The medieval hearth, constantly tended, kept both kinds of motion alive. Conversation, song, repair all, radiated outward from the same center. In its glow, entropy slowed. The fire was civilization's low-frequency heartbeat. In the 20th century, as technology multiplied, architecture lost that pulse. Climate control made buildings indifferent to season, and indifference spread to their inhabitants. Glass towers sealed from weather promised efficiency, but produced disorientation. Workers under constant temperature and light reported fatigue and estrangement. The body, deprived of cues, could no longer calibrate itself. Comfort without fluctuation became a form of numbness. Recent neuroscience gives this phenomenon a name: sensory deprivation of environment. The human nervous system needs variation day and night, warmth and chill to maintain psychological balance. The old houses, with their slow temperature waves, provided that natural rhythm. The modern building suppresses it. The result is an invisible coldness, a cultural hypothermia masked by thermostats. Relearning warmth therefore means re-entering time. The masonry heater teaches this perfectly. It requires anticipation. You light it before the chill, not after. The delay between fire and comfort invites foresight, the virtue of all sustainable systems. To live with such a stove is to think in tomorrow's temperature. The discipline extends outward to gardens, to communities, to generations. Patience becomes architecture's ethics. Artists and philosophers have begun to sense this. In contemporary Nordic design, the concept of hygge, often trivialized as coziness, actually denotes moral equilibrium. Enough light to see, enough heat to share, enough simplicity to breathe. It arises not from abundance, but proportion. A room heated just sufficiently, lit by reflected flame, feels more humane than one flooded with energy. Moderation becomes aesthetic truth. This principle resonates with ecology. Excess heat, whether in engines or economies, accelerates decay. The sustainable world will be one of controlled gradients, where comfort coexists with awareness of limit. In that sense, the peasant cabin was already post-industrial in spirit. It achieved balance through rhythm, not expansion. Its comfort was self-limiting by design. A fire once a day, a finite pile of wood, a cycle closed by snowmelt and regrowth. The measure of warmth was sufficiency. Such restraint need not imply hardship. On the contrary, the sensory richness of a modestly heated room, fragrance of resin, glow of brick, slow drift of smoke, engages more dimensions of being than the sterile uniformity of modern climate. The body remembers through scent and surface. To press a palm against warm stone is to feel history conducting itself through matter. That tactile continuity anchors identity more securely than any digital device. There is also a political reading. Dependence on external energy binds nations, as dependence on centralized heat binds individuals. The masonry stove, the log wall, the earthen floor all represent autonomy scaled to human hands. They return agency to the household. When a family can keep itself warm with local fuel and knowledge, it escapes a little of the empire of systems. Every rekindled fire is an act of quiet independence. And yet the ultimate lesson of warmth is humility. Fire consumes. Every comfort has cost. The ancestors who cut timber by axe knew this intimately. They read guilt in the smoke and gratitude in the coals. Such awareness kept extraction within balance. Modern society, insulated from consequence, burns without reflection. Fossil carbon, forests, futures. To rebuild houses that remember how to breathe is also to rebuild conscience. Perhaps this is why people who restore old cabins often describe a calm beyond nostalgia. Living within thick logs and slow heat, they report feeling held. The building becomes not a machine for comfort, but a companion with its own metabolism. When the stove sighs and the walls creak, one senses participation in a larger organism. The earth itself radiating back the sun it stored. Warmth ceases to be possession. It becomes relationship. In the end, to measure warmth rightly is to measure belonging. The medieval cabin, with its moss-sealed seams and steady stove, offered not luxury but coherence. Every element from the density of wood to the pace of fire aligned with human rhythm. Modernity fragmented that alignment but did not extinguish it. The ember still glows beneath the ash of progress. To rebuild with wisdom is simply to breathe upon it. The thermometer will continue to count degrees, but the true index of warmth lies elsewhere, in the silence between crackles, the ease of breath, the willingness to share the last log. When a house sustains those things, it has achieved the highest efficiency conversion of energy into meaning. To speak of the future home is usually to summon images of screens, sensors, and automation. A house that anticipates desire and adjusts itself accordingly. Yet the future, measured only in circuitry, is brittle. The true test of progress is not how many systems a house can control, but how few it needs to survive. A dwelling that can remain habitable without electricity, fuel delivery, or digital oversight is the genuine architecture of the 21st century. Resilience begins where dependency ends. The cabins of the past demonstrated this through mass and simplicity. The challenge now is to translate those qualities into materials available to modern builders. The question is not nostalgia, but physics. How can we combine thermal storage, airtightness, and breathability so that a home maintains equilibrium through interruption? Engineers exploring passive design have begun to rediscover answers already written in moss and clay. The passive house standard, developed in Germany in the 1990s, enforces extreme airtightness and insulation, reducing heating demand by up to 90%. Yet even these structures depend on mechanical ventilation and external energy. When the grid fails, they cool more slowly than ordinary houses, but still cool. What they lack is the thermal inertia that old log cabins possessed as a matter of course. Hybrid experiments point the way. In Austria, builders now construct masonry hybrid homes that combine high-mass interior cores, concrete, adobe, or stone with super-insulated exteriors. The walls act as thermal flywheels, smoothing daily temperature swings. In Canada's Yukon, architects use cross-laminated timber, CLT panels up to 8 inches thick, achieving both structure and heat storage in one material. These systems mimic the old scribe-fit log, but with industrial precision. What technology adds is not complexity, but consistency. Machines cut joints so tight that air leakage drops below measurable limits. The result is a modern echo of medieval craft mass joined to accuracy. Materials science has also rediscovered what ancient builders intuited, that porosity is strength. Walls must breathe to remain healthy. When vapor cannot escape, moisture condenses, leading to rot or mold. The solution lies in hygrothermal balance materials that store and release moisture as the air demands. Clay plaster, lime mortar, and untreated wood all perform this function naturally. After decades of synthetic membranes and foams, architects are returning to these low-tech compounds for high-tech reasons. Energy systems follow the same pattern of simplification. Photovoltaic panels, once luxury, now coat roofs cheaply. But panels alone do not guarantee resilience. Storage does. The new frontier is thermal, not electrical, storage, retaining sun-derived heat in mass rather than batteries. Water tanks, stone beds, even phase-change salts absorb excess solar energy by day and radiate it at night. In essence, they perform the same duty as the masonry heater, capturing intensity and releasing continuity. When paired with modest photovoltaic supply for lighting and pumps, such houses approach autonomy. The philosophy that guides this movement could be summarized in 3 words: slow, local, complete. Slow design accepts that comfort follows rhythm rather than instant response. It values time delay as stability. Local materials reduce dependence and harmonize with environment. They age gracefully instead of failing suddenly. Complete systems integrate structure, insulation, and heat storage into one organism rather than layers of competing technologies. Consider the Earth House experiments in Iceland, where basalt walls, turf roofs, and geothermal loops combine into near self-sufficient dwellings. During storms that cripple electric grids, these houses remain steady at 20 degrees Celsius with minimal input. Their secret lies in the same triad that warmed Scandinavian cabins: mass, enclosure, and radiant heat. Sensors inside record microfluctuations so gentle that inhabitants report feeling embraced by the house. Comfort, it seems, still depends on slowness. Social resilience parallels physical resilience. Communities that retain skill and mutual aid weather crises better than those that outsource maintenance. Future architecture must therefore teach as well as shelter. A home that can be repaired with hand tools, whose heating system a child can understand, resists both entropy and amnesia. This is where digital design can serve tradition rather than erase it. Open source plans, distributed fabrication, and virtual apprenticeships now allow forgotten crafts to spread globally. The internet, so often blamed for detachment, becomes a library of reconnection. In northern Japan, for instance, a cooperative of carpenters uses 3D scanning to archive centuries-old joinery, then applies it to post-tsunami rebuilding projects. The resulting structures meet seismic codes while remaining carbon neutral. Their wooden frames flex like trees. Their walls breathe like moss. Each beam carries QR codes linking to digital manuals, an elegant marriage of the tactile and the virtual. Here, resilience is not a return to the past, but a conversation across it. As climate volatility increases, such synthesis will define survival. Heat waves and blizzards alike challenge systems designed for narrow margins. The houses that endure will be those capable of thermal forgiveness, tolerating neglect, buffering extremes, recovering gracefully. Resilience is the art of gentleness under stress. A medieval log cabin embodied it naturally. The modern home must learn it deliberately. But resilience is also aesthetic. The pleasure of thick walls, of filtered daylight, of a silence not imposed, but earned. These are not luxuries, but psychological armors. In uncertain times, beauty itself becomes a form of stability. The warm room, like the steady heart, anchors all else. The modern obsession with smart. Architecture buildings that learn habits, sense motion, optimize temperature. Too often hides a simple truth. Intelligence without resilience is vanity. When power fails, the smartest house forgets everything. Screens go dark, sensors sleep, and comfort vanishes with the signal. True intelligence is passive, the ability to remain stable without thought. The new generation of builders understands this paradox. Across Europe and North America, they speak of passive intelligence, where design rather than circuitry carries the knowledge. Roofs angle not for style, but for sun. Windows shrink on the north face and widen to the south. Eaves cut summer glare, yet invite winter light. Every line of geometry becomes instruction, every material a memory. In these houses, comfort arises not from control but from harmony. One such project stands near Innsbruck, a 2-story timber clay home heated solely by a compact masonry stove. Its thick interior walls store solar gain from glazed courtyards, releasing warmth overnight. Air channels hidden within the structure move convection gently without fans. During a week-long grid outage in 2023, indoor temperature dropped only 4 degrees. Sensors recorded no condensation or mold. The house behaved like a living organism, breathing, adjusting, conserving. Another stands in Alaska's interior, where winters still reach 40 degrees. There, an architect and an Athabascan carpenter collaborated to combine scribe-fit log craft with triple-glazed windows and phase-change salt blocks embedded behind walls. Each block melts at 24 degrees, absorbing surplus heat from the stove. As the room cools, the salts crystallize, releasing it. No pumps, no wires, just chemistry echoing medieval physics. Residents report needing 1 firing per day, even in January. Such experiments redefine progress. The aim is no longer infinite comfort, but graceful degradation. The ability to lose support slowly, predictably, without catastrophe. A resilient house accepts imperfection the way a good sail accepts wind, by yielding. Flexible joints, breathable walls, reversible repairs. These features replace the brittle pursuit of permanence. Durability now means the capacity to mend. This philosophy spills naturally into ethics. A home that teaches humility through maintenance shapes different citizens. When warmth depends on tending, one learns proportion. When materials are local, one learns respect for place. The industrial dream of a maintenance-free life promised freedom but delivered alienation. Resilient architecture restores responsibility as privilege, the right to care for what sustains you. Technology can assist if it remembers its scale. Simple sensors can log temperature and humidity to guide design improvements. Algorithms can predict wood moisture cycles or chimney draft efficiency. But these tools should serve understanding, not replace it. The goal is transparency, not automation. Imagine a wall that displays its own energy history, a quiet dashboard of temperature waves and humidity pulses, so that inhabitants see time passing through matter. Awareness becomes part of comfort. Economically, the logic is equally sound. Life cycle analysis shows that a well-built passive mass house, though 10 to 15% more expensive upfront, returns the investment within a decade through reduced energy use and maintenance. Over 50 years, it outlives 3 conventional homes and consumes half the resources. Its cost is not lower, it is slower. Slowness again proves the measure of sustainability. In cities where land and pace conspire against patience, fragments of this philosophy appear in microforms. Thick earthen interiors inside concrete shells, radiant clay panels replacing drywall, communal courtyards that share heat through reflective surfaces. Urban resilience may begin not with grand design, but with the reintroduction of thermal texture, the tactile memory of warmth once universal and now almost exotic. Beyond efficiency, these ideas change how we imagine luxury. The luxury of the future will not be excess but independence, the ability to remain comfortable when systems fail. A home that needs no constant supply chain, that balances itself through design, becomes both sanctuary and protest. In a century defined by instability, the warm, quiet house is a revolutionary act. Education must follow. Already, universities in Scandinavia and Canada teach heritage physics, courses blending vernacular construction with modern modeling. Students learn to simulate airflow through moss chinking, to calculate heat capacity of birch logs, to 3D print molds for clay panels. They study not ruins but prototypes. The dialogue between old and new replaces the hierarchy of past and future. In this sense, the future home is not futuristic at all. It is an ancestral technology, recovered through science. Its intelligence is geological, not digital. Its comfort geological, not electrical. It stands as a mediator between civilization and climate, absorbing shock through patience. When storms rage or grids flicker, it endures not by fighting the world, but by resonating with it. Perhaps resilience, finally, is a moral temperature, the warmth of adequacy rather than excess, of knowledge carried quietly in structure. The future home will be warm because it remembers how to be cold. It will hum not with machines, but with the slow pulse of stored sun. It will ask nothing heroic from its occupants beyond attention. At dusk, in one of these houses, light fades on the clay walls. The masonry core still breathes heat from morning fire. Outside, snow muffles the wind. Inside, silence thickens until you can hear the tiny clicks of timber adjusting to night. This is not nostalgia. This is equilibrium civilization at peace with its physics. The future, it turns out, feels a lot like home once did. The circle closes where it began, with fire. Not the violent blaze that consumes forests or engines, but the patient ember that sustains life. Humanity's oldest technology remains its most eloquent. Every new invention, from furnace to microchip, is an echo of the first spark struck between stone and steel. To return to the hearth is not to retreat from progress. It is to acknowledge that progress without center drifts into coldness. For 2 centuries we have built outward, away from the flame. Industry promised liberation from elemental dependence. No more chopping wood, no more smoke, no more soot. Homes grew cleaner, brighter, emptier. Heat arrived silently through grids. The hearth became decorative, a hollow mouth lined with ceramic logs. The fire survived only as image and nostalgia for a labor we believed obsolete. Yet the more perfect our control, the more fragile our comfort. The return of the hearth does not mean rebuilding medieval cabins exactly as they were. It means restoring what the hearth represented, a visible participatory connection between energy and existence. A flame in the room makes cost visible. It teaches moderation in a way that invisible fuel lines never can. Watching wood burn, we see entropy. We see time converting into light. That awareness, ancient, instinctive, is the beginning of responsibility. Modern psychology confirms this elemental bond. Studies of firelight exposure show measurable reductions in stress and heart rate. Rhythmic flicker activates the same neural pathways as social trust. Sitting around a flame synchronizes breathing and conversation. The hearth literally warms the body into community. Screens imitate that flicker, but without warmth, producing restlessness rather than calm. The body knows the difference. In architecture, the new hearth may take many forms: a masonry stove, a solar thermal wall, a communal kitchen core. The essence is not combustion, but presence. A locus where energy exchange is visible, audible, shared. Even electric radiant panels can evoke this if designed honestly, revealing their function rather than hiding it. The return is philosophical, not stylistic. What matters is the recentering of the home around a point of relation instead of dispersion. Throughout history, societies have measured themselves by the organization of their fires. Nomadic tents place them at the center, medieval halls raise them into chimneys, industrial cities banish them underground. Each move mirrored a shift in values, from collective to private, from ritual to efficiency. The 21st century stands poised for another turn, back toward visible sustainability, energy sources integrated into daily life, inviting awareness instead of denial. Imagine an apartment block where every unit shares a thermal atrium, a modern hearth. Solar collectors heat water that circulates through thick earthen walls. Residents gather there in winter light, as people once gathered around flames. The glow is different, but the logic the same. Warmth is communion. Such places already exist in small experiments across Northern Europe and Japan, proving that efficiency and intimacy need not oppose each other. The return of the hearth is also cultural memory resurfacing through necessity. As energy becomes uncertain and climates swing between extremes, societies reevaluate what truly keeps them alive. Electricity may fail, but understanding endures. The skill to make, mend, and share heat becomes a civic art again. In Icelandic schools, children now learn to build small masonry stoves as lessons in both physics and patience. In Finnish towns, public saunas, once declining, are reappearing as communal refuges during power shortages. Warmth reclaims its ancient role as public good. Fire thus returns not only to homes but to ethics. It reminds us that comfort, like flame, requires tending. Leave it untended and it dies. Feed it carelessly and it destroys. The balance is moral as much as physical. Every civilization that forgets this rhythm consumption without attention eventually faces coldness of another kind. The hearth's rebirth coincides with a broader yearning for tangibility. After decades of virtual life, people crave matter that answers back, clay that cracks, wood that creaks, heat that hums. The sensory world is not a distraction from intellect, but its foundation. When we touch what warms us, thought regains weight. The new builders, blending digital precision with ancient mass, understand this. They design not gadgets but gravity's places, where the mind slows enough to match the world's temperature. Returning to the hearth also redefines architecture's purpose. The modernist vision of a house as a machine for living fulfilled itself and exhausted itself. Machines obey, they do not reciprocate. The hearth suggests a different paradigm. The house as organism, capable of dialogue. It breathes, stores, releases, rests. It mediates between seasons as the body mediates between hunger and satiation. In such a home, design becomes ecology, a conversation among materials, heat, and people. This return will not happen uniformly. It begins at the edges mountain cabins, off-grid communities, experimental eco-villages, then filters inward to cities. But ideas move faster than materials. Already, urban dwellers plant rooftop gardens and install small, radiant tiles that mimic stone heat. Cafes center on visible ovens. Libraries add communal fireplaces. In each gesture, a flicker of recognition, warmth as meaning. To bring fire back safely into modern life requires humility before physics. The masonry heater remains the master class. Its slow burn and long release teach every principle of sustainable energy in miniature. High temperature efficiency, low emissions, distributed storage, user discipline. For children, it is a perfect laboratory of thermodynamics visible in brick and light. The ancient Pechka becomes a teacher again, this time in universities. And perhaps that is the quiet revolution ahead. Not new materials, but new consciousness of the old. The future architect may wield both 3D printer and axe, both simulation software and intuition of grain. The hearth will not return as nostalgia, but as curriculum proof that wisdom and warmth share the same root. The hearth returns first in imagination. People begin to dream again of houses that sound like breathing rather than machinery. In those dreams, walls are thick, windows deep, and fire speaks softly through stone. The dream matters because imagination precedes form. What we build follows what we miss. The longing for visible warmth is the mind's way of remembering its body. Step by step, imagination solidifies. Architects sketch homes where every room shares one warm mass instead of isolated vents. Builders rediscover lime plaster, heavy timber, handmade brick. Neighborhoods experiment with communal heating loops that store summer sun underground for winter release. Nothing here is regression. It is refinement. The rediscovery that the shortest route to progress sometimes curves backward. In these new hearths, fire is not always flame. It may be solar heat captured by rock, or biogas produced from food waste, or even the slow warmth of compost piles and greenhouse walls. The symbol remains constant, energy visible, accountable, shared. When people can see the source of comfort, they treat it with respect. Transparency becomes morality. Culturally, the hearth's return signals an end to the era of indifference. The 20th century prized detachment, climate control, noise control, emotional control. The 21st, facing consequence, begins to crave connection. A house that reveals its workings, that breathes with the weather, offers that connection daily. Through it, we relearn proportion, that to be warm enough is not to be unlimited, and that every surplus has a shadow. The rediscovered hearth also changes our sense of community. Shared heat becomes shared responsibility. In cold countries, public buildings once doubled as refuges when storms came. Their fires burned for everyone. Reviving such customs turns architecture into social infrastructure. Warmth circulates like trust strongest when exchanged. Municipal warm rooms powered by waste heat from bakeries or data centers already appear in European towns. They echo the ancient village hall, proving that resilience can be generous. Philosophers of environment now speak of convivial energy, systems that invite participation rather than passive consumption. The hearth is its archetype. You cannot outsource the tending of fire. You must watch, adjust, wait. In that waiting, awareness grows. Time spent before a flame is never wasted. It reorders attention, teaching continuity in an age of acceleration. To stand before a stove at dusk, feeding it with small branches, is to glimpse an older form of intelligence, the patience of maintenance. The ember brightens, the draft steadies, the mass begins to hum. There is no spectacle, no productivity, only equilibrium. Such moments reveal the hidden symmetry between physics and ethics, stability achieved not by domination but by care. Science, for its part, now circles back to affirm what culture always felt. Thermodynamics describes energy as constant but always dispersing. Life is the local reversal of that trend. Every act that concentrates warmth, that keeps motion within boundary without waste, is a defiance of entropy, a small assertion of meaning against oblivion. The hearth is civilization's metaphor for that defiance. To keep it burning wisely is to sustain order in both matter and mind. This understanding reframes design itself. The goal of architecture ceases to be control and becomes correspondence. Buildings no longer oppose climate. They converse with it. Walls store, roofs collect, windows listen. Technology, when present, follows the same etiquette. Quiet, adaptive, transparent. The smartest system is the one that disappears into rhythm. A home that maintains 20 degrees Celsius through storm and silence without complaint is a moral as well as an engineering success. Such homes already stand like seeds of a broader transformation. In Norway's fjords, villages rebuild old boathouses as community saunas stone, cedar, seawater, fire. In the American Rockies, families construct passive mass dwellings with earthen floors and wood stoves at the core, running lights and tools from rooftop panels. In Mongolia, new yurts combine felt insulation with lithium salt heat stores. Everywhere the pattern repeats: density, delay, participation. The wisdom of survival re-enters design vocabulary, not as heritage tourism, but as frontier science. Yet the hearth's return will also be inner. The human nervous system, long overstimulated by screens and noise, seeks coherence. Watching flames, feeling radiant heat, offers that coherence through simplicity. The body aligns with its environment. Perception slows to the tempo of breath. Psychologists call this thermal mindfulness, awareness rooted in sensation rather than abstraction. It may be the most profound therapy civilization can offer itself. When all these threads, science, culture, ethics interweave, the outline of a new civilization appears, not colder or poorer, but wiser in its warmth. Energy transitions become not crises, but rites of passage. Homes evolve from consumers to companions. The ancient equilibrium between fire and shelter, once thought primitive, returns as the definition of sophistication. Imagine, then, the evening in such a world. Outside, wind scours the hills. Inside, a house of timber and clay glows faintly from stored sun. Families cook, read, or simply sit, each aware of the quiet labor of heat moving through walls. No engines hum. The temperature holds steady, not by command but by design. Children grow up thinking this natural, that warmth is earned through understanding, not entitlement. When they step into the cold, they feel continuity rather than shock. They belong. The return of the hearth does not promise paradise. Fire can still burn, stone can still crack, but it promises relationship between energy and ethics, between humans and their home planet. The lesson of the log cabin, the masonry heater, the sphagnum moss was never merely technical. It was about respect for limits and faith in craft. Those limits, once seen as poverty, now reveal themselves as grace. At last, after centuries of noise, we begin to hear the quiet physics again. Heat wants patience. Wood wants care. Walls want breath. The future home listens. It remembers that survival was always a dialogue, not a conquest. In that remembrance lies hope. The ember that never died beneath the ash of progress glows brighter now. It asks only that we pause, that we look, that we learn once more how to keep a small fire burning through a long winter, gently, knowingly together.